In the year 2000, OutKast released one of their most popular singles, Miss Jackson. The song is a beautiful apology to a past lover for rushing too fast into a failed relationship. Well, half the verses are about that. But I'm not interested in the verses today. I want to talk about the chorus. In the chorus, Andre 3000 sings the lines, "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson," and then "I apologize a trillion times." Now, Miss Jackson is a very popular song, and if every time it gets played means more apologies, that begs the question, has Andre 3000 actually apologized a trillion times? That is what we're going to figure out today. The first thing that we need to know to answer this question is, how many times does Andre apologize in the song? Well, across all of the choruses, he says, "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson," 10 times, and he follows each of those up with an "I apologize a trillion times." Let's count this as 20 apologies in the song Miss Jackson. This means that if every play of the song adds 20 apologies to the total, Miss Jackson would need to have been played 50 billion times for Andre to reach that 1 trillion apologies. So, how close is he? To answer that question, we're going to have to first take a look at where many people currently get their music: Spotify. On Spotify, Miss Jackson has 1.3 billion plays right now. But what counts as a play? Technically, a play on Spotify doesn't mean someone listened to the entire song, it just means that someone listened to at least 30 seconds of it. However, in the song, 30 seconds is just before the second apology, meaning that, yes, while some people only listen to a few apologies, and this got counted as a play, some people listened to one apology and didn't get counted as a play at all. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to say that these two things cancel each other out, and we can assume that these 1.3 billion plays, on average, listen to all 20 apologies. This means that Spotify starts our total apology count at 26 billion. I'll put that number at the bottom of the screen as we move on to other streaming services. Now, I want to look at popular ones like Apple Music, Amazon Music, Pandora, Deezer, but none of these have public play counts. So I'm going to have to do some estimation. Here's a graph from businessofapps.com showing where people listen to music online. I'll talk about YouTube later, but what I'm most interested in is ratios. According to this graph, Spotify has 626 million active users. Apple Music has 93 million, Amazon Music has 75, Pandora has 43, and Deezer has 22. As I showed before, Miss Jackson has 1.3 billion plays on Spotify. If we assume that the number of users on a music platform roughly correlates to the number of plays Miss Jackson has on that same music platform, then Miss Jackson would have about 197 million plays on Apple Music, 159 on Amazon Music, 91 on Pandora, and 47 million on Deezer. When we add these all together and multiply them by the 20 apologies in each play, we get an extra 9.88 billion apologies. This number is probably an overestimation. I mean, SoundCloud has 132 million users, but only 2 million plays of Miss Jackson. However, this 9.88 billion number doesn't include any non-English streaming services. And while those ones would have much less listens to Miss Jackson than their English counterparts, the number probably isn't negligible. So let's say that 9.88 billion is a decent compromise. There's going to be a lot more rough estimations in this video, so bear with me. For now, let's add this number to our total, bringing us up to about 36 billion apologies. The next thing I want to look at is YouTube. Actually, let's look at YouTube Music first. This one actually does have public play counts, and we can see that Miss Jackson has 794 million plays here. Multiply that by 20, add that to our total, and now we're above 50 billion. But that's not the only way that people use YouTube to listen to music. The official music video for Miss Jackson has 387 million views, but it's not the only music video on YouTube. There are plenty of re-uploads of the song Miss Jackson, so I'm just going to total up the views from all the ones with over a million. Doing that gives about 80 million extra views from YouTube. Actually, do remixes mean more apologies? I'd say so, as long as it's still Andre singing the lines. So remixes would count, but covers would not. The last thing that we need to cover for YouTube is viewer retention. What percentage of a music video does the average person watch? I don't have any concrete data on this, but I found a now deleted Reddit account that says they average about 40% viewer retention on their piano cover channel. Miss Jackson is a pretty popular song, so let's say it has about 50%. So, after factoring in reposts, remixes, and retention, my math returned roughly 5 billion more apologies to throw onto our growing total. Now, I've been talking about a lot of modern ways to listen to music, but let's go back to the year 2000 when Miss Jackson was first released. The Stankonia album sold, according to bestsellingalbums.com, over 5 million copies. How many times did each of these copies get played? I have no data on this. So let's just throw math out the window for a second and go off of vibes. On one hand, there's going to be people who buy the album solely to collect and haven't even opened it. On the other, some people would have absolutely loved the album and played it over 100 times. Let's just say for the purpose of this video, the average is somewhere in the 10 times ballpark. This would mean that Miss Jackson has been played over 53 million times just from Stankonia's CDs. This adds another billion to Andre's total apologies. What else was popular in the 2000s? Well, what about MTV? The channel played a lot of music videos from the 1980s to around 2010. So how often did they play Miss Jackson? And to how many viewers? Because remember, we're counting how many times Miss Jackson has been played. So if MTV broadcasts their music videos to a bunch of TVs, that counts as one play per TV. To answer that question, there's this old article talking about MTV's effect on young teens that claims MTV had about 350,000 households watching it at any given time. This number is from 1991, at the peak of MTV's popularity. Let's say that the average number of viewers went down to about 200,000 in the decade after Miss Jackson was released. As for how many times MTV played OutKast's music video, Wikipedia says that MTV would play about 8 hours in music videos in 2000, but only 3 hours of music videos in 2008. So let's assume an average of 1 play of Miss Jackson every day. Some days had much more than 1 play, especially when the song was first released, and some days had no plays at all. However, I'm going to estimate that these cancel out, leaving an average of once a day. So if we take 200,000 average viewers, watching a daily showing of Miss Jackson from October 2000 when the song released to November 2008, which is when MTV pivoted away from music videos by ending stuff like TRL. When we take all of that math and smush it together, we get 589 million plays, or 11.8 billion more apologies. Our total is now just under 70 billion apologies, but we can add a lot more to that by looking at the most popular way to listen to music: radio stations. I'm going to divide radio into 2 time periods. The 2000s, when both radio and the song Miss Jackson were at their peak popularity, and 2011 onward to the present day. So, in the 2000s decade, how many radio stations played Miss Jackson? And how often did they do so? Again, no data, but we can do some estimation. In 2011, Billboard said that they sampled 1,214 stations to figure out the Billboard Hot 100. Now, Miss Jackson was number 1 on the Hot 100 for a week in 2001, meaning that a decent number of these stations had to have been playing the song at least a bit. Let's say that from Miss Jackson's release in October 2000 until the end of 2001, 400 radio stations were playing the song on average 4 times a day. This is just a very rough estimation, but hopefully it captures the popularity of the song in 2001. Then from 2002 to 2010, let's assume that only 100 stations play the song on average once a day. This gives us a number of about 1 million total times that radio stations played the song Miss Jackson in the 2000s decade. Now, how many people listen to the radio at any given time? Well, according to Wikipedia, the year 2000 had just under 13,000 radio stations in the US. Wikipedia also says that 2005 had 230 million people listening to the radio weekly. And in 2001, the Canadian government did a study that showed that the average Canadian spent 20.3 hours a week listening to the radio. If we assume that these numbers are similar in America, then we can say that 230 million listeners use radio for about 20.3 hours weekly. That means that at any given time, 27.8 million Americans were actively listening to the radio, which means that the average radio station had 2,200 listeners at any given time. That means that for each of the 1 million station plays we calculated before, 2,200 people were listening each time. This gives 2 billion plays and 44 billion apologies from this decade of radio usage. For 2011 to the present day, let's just take those numbers from 2002 to 2010 and half them, since less people listen to the radio now. That gives us an extra 11.5 billion apologies, which means that in total, radio listens almost doubled the apology count. The final thing that I want to look at is MP3 files. There are two main ways people used MP3s to listen to music: iTunes and piracy. To get a number on piracy, let's look at the biggest pirate website at the time of Miss Jackson's popularity, Napster. Wikipedia says that Napster peaked at 80 million users. One of the most popular genres to pirate at this time was rap and hip-hop, so it's not too crazy to say that of all 80 million Napster users, on average, each of them listened to Miss Jackson once, giving 80 million plays. This means that Napster adds 1.6 billion apologies to the total. And to keep it simple, let's say that iTunes had a similar number of Miss Jackson plays as Napster had, since it had a similar number of users. This means that MP3 files contribute about 3.2 billion apologies, bringing the final total of times that Andre apologized to Miss Jackson to 128,501,500,000. Now, this is less than 15% of the promised 1 trillion. However, if someone apologized to me 128 billion times, I'd believe them when they say that they are for real. With that being said, thanks for watching, and God bless.